Hello, my loves, and welcome once again to Strange Playgrounds. Now, those of you who pay attention to what's going on within the horror genre of late can't help but have noticed that there's been quite a lot of ruction. There's been a fair old bit of a how to do over the last couple of weeks regarding certain horror award nominations and the responses of yet another mediocre old white man who doesn't like the fact that people who are not white, people who are queer, have been nominated for these awards. And it's caused enormous ruction, given that I'm not going to name the guy because I wouldn't want to give him any more attention than is warranted. I don't think it's even worth it, to be quite frank. Most of you, those of you who follow, who are aware of the genre, will know of him anyway. And those of you who don't, well, just let him fade into obscurity, because that is what's going to happen as a result of this. He will just become another one in a long line of mediocre old white men who destroyed their own legacy, who destroyed their own every ounce of good faith, every relationship that they've ever had, with these infantile temper tantrums, with these outbursts, these insane paranoid rantings at the fact that they are being obliged to share the sandpit, that they've been told that the playground doesn't belong to them exclusively anymore. And it's more than anything, it's sad. It's sad because this guy, I've never heard of him myself up until this point, but apparently, I imagine more in the US than he does here, has quite a following. He's quite significant. He's published several quite significant collections called Borderlands since the 1980s, and they were once aspirational. They were once volumes that people would want to be part of. Not anymore. Not anymore. What I find most incredible to me is that how you can be part of this genre in particular. It's true of all the speculative genres. It's true of fantasy and science fiction as well. But I don't understand how you can operate in horror in particular and be so conservative. I just don't understand it. I don't understand conservative horror in general, because horror, by its very nature, is innately transgressive. It's designed to be counterculture. That's at its most ideal. It is counterculture, and therefore, queer people from marginalized or underrepresented demographics really have a place here. And that doesn't really matter whether they happen to be white or whatever. If you are underrepresented, if you are for any reason outside of the fishbowl looking in, then horror is your place. Horror gives you it gives us the language, the contexts, the mediums, the platforms, the subjects for exploring and expressing that experience. And quite frankly, over the last couple of decades, horror, as a result of the inclusion of all of these different voices from ethnic minorities, voices from queer writers and poets and artists, voices from neuroatypical people, has effloresced. There are now so many more voices and so many more subjects and themes and concepts being explored in the genre that it's actually quite bewildering. I imagine for those who are more casual in their affiliation with horror, who only know about the sort of mainstream publications, when they start to dip toe into the small press or the independent publication scene, it's utterly bewildering, because there are so many voices, there are so many publication houses, there are so many artists and arenas in which they function. that it's rather difficult finding your place. And that's one of the difficulties of so many voices being present, but it's also one of the wonderful things. It is sort of like kid in a sweet shop time, you know? For me, certainly. There is so much out there that I have trouble keeping up these days. There are so many brilliant short story collections, anthologies, novels that I want to read because they're by writers who share my experience to a certain degree. They are by writers who have similar identities, but that will express those identities in different ways or eke out different aspects of or significancies of those identities and of those experiences. That's what really, really fascinates me. But people like the guy in question, they seem to want horror to be ghettoized. They seem to want it to be conservative. They want it to be enshrined and monolithic, that it must be this, this, and this, and nothing else. It cannot be protean, it cannot change, it cannot swell. It must be prescribed according to their peculiar preconceptions and perspectives. It must belong to them and them exclusively. The playground has bounds that they set. They are the gatekeepers of the playground, and no one else can trespass, even though the playground, my loves, has never had fences or borders or boundaries. It's never been the case. They've just assumed it because it's catered to them for so long, right? They've bullied and shouted and thrown their temper tantrums, and they've been coddled. They've been coddled. They've been allowed exclusive access for the longest time, and they've had it easy. I'm sorry, but they've had it easy. The amount of mediocre fiction that's published by straight white guys is phenomenal. There is a glut of it, and there's been a glut of it since the 1980s. I'm really sorry, there really has. That's not to say there are not brilliant writers from that demographic. Of course there are. Of course there are. There are some amazing people. There's Stephen King, there's Ramsey Campbell. There are just some amazing people out there who are doing work. But they are now having to raise their game a little bit. They are now competing with other voices. And it's not just their experience that's being catered to. And that is where the temper tantrum comes from, it seems to me. It's this frustration that they seem to have, this immediate frustration with having to acknowledge that other people even exist. You know, we irritate them by the fact of our existence, and that's almost a wonderful thing. That's almost an empowering thing to know that. To know that because I operate within this genre and there's a potential that I might aspire within it at some point, that I'm pissing these people off, that I'm getting under their skin. It's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. What's also wonderful, not to dwell on the more negative aspects, is the way the community has rallied around. Now, this is ambiguous. This is an ambiguous thing, because by all accounts, this gentleman in question has been a piece of work from the very beginning. People have looked back, and he has published articles where he's railed against, like, African American writers who've gotten awards, or writers from various different demographics and backgrounds who have gotten awards or have gotten some acclamation for what they've written. He's been writing articles since the 1990s about this, and yet he's always been a prominent part of the Horror Writers Association. Not anymore, by the way. They finally cut ties with him. And yet people haven't spoken out about him. And okay, maybe because they didn't know, it's easier today because of the internet, right? People know immediately. But back then it was a bit more difficult, obviously. Even so, while it helped their career, they were silent. It's only now that they're speaking up, And that's problematic. That's really problematic, because that does betray a certain tokenism, right? But generally speaking, the reaction of the writing community, the horror community, has been phenomenally positive. It's been really good. They've wholeheartedly condemned this guy, by and large. They have wholeheartedly condemned him, and he's basically out. There's no one who's going to ever touch him again. My guess is what he'll do is what every shrieking man-child does, and that is he'll turn to a different audience. He'll turn to the audience that he knows he can make a buck out of, right? The ones who want to hear this rhetoric, oh, I've been excluded from the left-leaning, blah, 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 the censorious lefties have excluded me from my genre, you can't say anything these days, blah, 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 blah. The fact that he went on a massive racist, bigoted, homophobic rant twice in recent weeks. Both in print and on podcasts, notwithstanding. No, you are going to have consequences for your actions for the first time ever. And also, it's the fact of the age of this guy. Like, he's nearly 80, this guy. So he's old enough to be my father, my grandfather, actually. So it's like, Jesus Christ, man, get a grip, if I'm half your age, I'm less than half your age, and if I'm able to operate without having these shrieking entitled temper tantrums, that should shame you. If people as young as me and even younger are showing greater grace and dignity and consideration, that should be shameful to you. It should be shameful to all of them, all of these old guard, these old white men who seem to think that they are the gatekeepers, that they somehow, that these products and these genres, these playgrounds belong to them. They fucking don't, I'm afraid. They fucking don't. They don't belong to anyone, per se. But I tell you what, they do speak to us in a way that they don't to you, because we are the marginalized, we are the excluded, we are the demonized and the monstered, and we bring that to what we create. I'm sorry, but if you go and look, if you go to, I mean, I know it's the Evil Empire, but go to Amazon, type in queer horror, type in like LGBTQ short story collections or anthologies, and you will find some of the best work. You will find work by Paula Dash, you'll find work by Hailey Piper, you'll find work by Billy Martin, aka Poppy Z Bright, you'll find work by Mark Allen Gunnels, by James Bennett, by myself in some instances. You will find some amazing work out there by Laura Marrow, by just these incredible creators who are doing stuff with the genre that, quite frankly, hasn't been done and maybe should have been done before now, They're taking it to places that couldn't have been considered before, and they are expanding the scope and the definition of the genre. And that can only be good. That can only be good. But to people like the gentleman in question, it's a threat, because it's not talking to me exclusively. It's not talking to my experience and feeding my biases and my preconceptions, and that's not right. I can't handle that. It has to be exclusive, That's the funny thing. They are afraid, it's ironic, but they are afraid of being marginalized in the way that we are. And have been, both within this genre and many others, for many, 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 many decades, for generations. It's amusing, to say the least, isn't it? Why are you afraid of being marginalized? Is it because you treat marginalized people like crap and you're afraid of being in the same area? Is that it? Probably, but that's the thing, isn't it? They're not going to be marginalized. That's not the way it works. They are not being marginalized. Straight white men still predominate this genre. They still predominate the awards ceremonies. They still predominate the bodies that give the awards ceremonies, the judging panels. They still predominate everything, and that's because of the nature of our traditions. But that's not enough, right? That's not enough. If they cannot handle that we are stepping outside of our prescribed boundaries, we have a place and it's here and we should stay there. Otherwise, we're trespassing on their territory, and they actually lack the scope. There's a kind of Dunning-Kruger effect where they can't understand that it doesn't belong to them. It's nothing to do with them. They don't get to tell us one way or the other. They don't get to prescribe what we write, what we imagine, what we create, and they don't get to determine what accolades we get for it. That's just tough, and they're going to have to suck it up. They need to learn what children learn when they're very young, what most healthy children learn when they're very, very, very young, and that is that the sandpit or the communal playground doesn't belong to them, and they're just going to have to deal with that, and that's the end of it.